All right, Terry, one last question for you. And that's, what's the best or most creative public use of the collections you've seen?
Well, there's several answers to this, but I'm going to give you the one that I think is the most important. And we got in a collection, maybe I'm going to say probably 10 years ago. I could give you a exact answer if I looked it up. I think it's about 10 years ago. And it was a collection called the Regional Drug Initiative. And this was a really multi-jurisdictional group with the reason we have the records is because the district attorney led the group, but it was the sheriff's office, City of Portland Police Bureau, FBI, anybody that might have kind of an intersection with the nascent war on drugs, because that's really what this was. This was the governmental layout for how to proceed with the war on drugs. And so again, a collection that just sat there for a long time. But getting to your ideas about how research and outreach and reference might be a little different nowadays. I knew a guy who was interested in this stuff because he'd done work on a couple of sign projects in town, and I knew he had some interest in this area. So I said, "Hey, come out and check this new collection out and see what it is." It wasn't processed yet, but I knew generally what was in it, and I knew what he was interested in. He started plowing through it, and he found some stuff for his project, and then he left without, it wasn't a really big deal until he came back about a year later, and he said, "I am doing research on drug houses." And I said, "Well, I don't know anything about drug houses." And he said, "Well, that's what they're called." And evidently a family member had a house that had been called a drug house, and that was his vernacular for it, drug house. And so I was still trying to make the connection here, what was going on. And finally, I got down to the point that his relative's house had been seized as a drug house. And I said, "Are you talking about civil forfeiture?" He says, "I don't know, let's look it up." And so we started looking up some of the laws. He says, "That's totally it." And so all of a sudden, this collection that had been used kind of for this little purpose ballooned. And he started doing quite a bit of research in the use of civil forfeiture in the war on drugs in Portland to dismantle urban neighborhoods so that they could then be revitalized, or whatever term you want to use for that. Some people might have other terms for it, but that was the term used. But he then proceeded to do quite a bit of research in that to kind of show whole neighborhoods, not just his relative's house, but whole neighborhoods' interest in what was going on with gentrification and some of the other issues that Portland faces on a regular basis, and how that can be traced back to Multnomah County's active and direct participation in the fake war on drugs, which is really a war on Black folks, Black and brown folks. And it's just fascinating to me how two things in this really fascinated me. One is that the records are just sitting there. I mean, this is like a blueprint for what everybody has said was so horrible and happened. This is a blueprint for it. I mean, nobody was hiding anything. This was just right there. But the other thing is how just a really small descriptive element makes the difference between whether people can find this stuff or not. If I had just said, "Well, drug house, don't know what it means, keep on moving," then this collection would have just sat there. But by kind of teasing out what a drug house really was, what could it mean in governmentese, really made the connection successful, so that the research worked for somebody who may not be familiar, number one, with archives terminology, but also government terminology. So that was a really fascinating and good public use of some of our records.